SEP Fanfic Readings presents Accidental Proposal by CJRed. Chapter 1. Prologue. Hermione Jean Granger had been through rather a lot in her young life. She had lost her parents to her own wand, having erased all their memories of her and sent them to Australia so they would be safe. She had been almost killed so many times she had lost count, the first being when she was just a mere 11 years old. She had been on the run from the most dangerous dark wizard of all time for almost a full year. She had lost friends, people she considered family, to a war she started fighting herself at the age of 15. She had robbed a bank, ridden a dragon, and destroyed a Horcrux. She had been tortured and still bore the scars from her run-in with a sociopath. And it was that very scar that she was staring at now, as the ministry official sat with her, his face worn and tired. Mudblood. She had spent every moment since she had found out she was a witch trying to prove herself. She had been raised by muggles, which meant that most of the wizarding world looked down on her. She didn't care, had never really cared. Yes, it made her want to work harder, want to be perfect. She had been desperate to learn anything and everything she could about the magical world. But this, she wasn't sure she had ever wanted to know this. She looked back up at the man and tried to moisten her dry mouth. "How do you know this is true? This could just be—" She closed her eyes as she took a few deep breaths, hoping to calm herself, even though her heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest. "This could just be a trick," Hermione said hoarsely. The man cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. We have taken that into consideration. There is a spell we can perform to check that this information is indeed veritable." Hermione nodded. Yes, there would be a spell. "Well, can we get this over with?" she said, opening her eyes. "Do the spell." The man gave her a look full of pity. "We are simply waiting for—" The man paused, as if choosing his words carefully. We need a family member." Hermione tried to rack her brain for who that could possibly be. "I thought you said the man who made this declaration was in Azkaban. You can't be bringing him here from there." The man went a little pale. No, of course not. He had a son. We are waiting—" Hermione sat up, her eyes wide with shock. "I might have a brother." The old man nodded. "Yes, he was born 10 months after you, actually." Hermione shook her head. "Well, that's preposterous." The wizard shrugged. "It seems highly unlikely, but we have to check out his claims. You were born after they had married, so there are inheritance issues too." Hermione tensed and said harshly, "No, I don't want a bloody nut from his family." The man cleared his throat again and calmly said, "Let us wait." Hermione sat back and waited for 20 minutes, until finally there was a knock on the door. She didn't turn as it opened. She was starting to shake with nerves. Finally, she looked up and into the wide, shocked eyes of someone she knew, although not very well. Theodore Beaufort Knott stared down at the woman with a mixture of shock and anger. When the solicitor had shown up that morning with the news that his father had redrafted his personal will, Theo had not been surprised. His father was dying. He knew that. The man was wasting away in prison for his crimes committed during the war. This summer, he had known that he would die. He hadn't been in good shape after the war, or even before. Every time Theo had visited his father, it had been obvious that he was coming to the end of his life. But this fucking solicitor hadn't been there to hand Theo a copy of the new will. He had been there to tell Theo that his parents had been keeping a massive secret. His father, on his deathbed no less, now wanted the world to know about it. Theo had thought that perhaps the man had sired a bastard with another witch after his mother died and kept he or she hidden. He had been partly right. His father had sired another child. However, the girl wasn't a bastard. Hermione Granger looked at him through her 2 big brown eyes and very pale face. She looked fucking terrified, and had been drained of her normally tan complexion, as if she had been inside too long. Theo searched her face for similarities, and was shocked to see that she did in fact look like his mother. They had the same eyes, their noses were the same, and fuck, she had his mother's hair. It was obvious now, since it wasn't a bushy mess anymore, but in longer curls that fell down her back. He turned to the wizard and said coldly, "Do the charm." The man stood up and flicked his wand to perform the charm. He did so 3 times before he nodded and then said slowly, "You are a full-blood match. Same mother, same father." Theo knew he too had gone white. He grabbed the back of the chair and said, "And her birth date?" The old man frowned but said slowly, "Is correct. She was born 10 months and 3 days before you. Improbable, but apparently not impossible." Theo's knuckles were turning white, and all he could do was say, "Leave us, now." The man nodded and rushed out. Hermione was breathing heavily as she watched the large boy in front of her go deathly pale. He hadn't looked at her since the man left. He was staring at his hands, as if he were trying to force them to let go of the chair. The man turned to her suddenly, his eyes frantic. "You just found out too?" Hermione nodded and started to sob. "I don't understand," she said hopelessly. Theo shook his head and finally collapsed into the chair, his fist still clenched. "He sent me a letter. He said that our mother had gotten pregnant before they were married. They kept it a secret, but the scandal would have been amazing. My father's mother was crazy, very traditional. She threatened to have you murdered if they didn't make you disappear. So they put you up for adoption, and then somehow she got pregnant again with me." Hermione shook her head. "But why would they give me to Muggles? You're pureblood." Theo interrupted her, his eyes wide and his voice angry. "So are you! Fuck!" He stood up and kicked the desk, his face full of loathing. "That fucking bastard just abandoned you with Muggles. He had to know how dangerous that was." Hermione gasped and took some deep breaths, trying to control herself. "No, I was fine. My parents loved me. I was safe." She watched the man rip at his hair with both hands, his face too pale and his eyes wild. "You were safe!" he screamed at her. Then he walked over and yanked up her sleeve. "Look at this! That bitch carved into your arm with a cursed blade. She tortured you. My best friend still has fucking nightmares about it. I heard all about it, and you are my sister." He spat angrily. Hermione was shaking now as he let go of her arm and sank down in front of her. "I am so sorry. I am so fucking sorry. I swear I would have protected you. I should have protected you." Theo's face was full of anguish. He looked angry and broken. Hermione could feel the revulsion coming off of him in waves. Hermione broke and she threw herself into the boy's arms. "It wasn't you. It wasn't your fault." And that was how the brother and sister spent the rest of that afternoon, crying, yelling, and trying to understand how any of this could have happened to them. Theo brought her back to his townhouse in Diagon Alley, where he asked her a million questions, apologized about a million more times, and got very drunk.